Kim Chagnon. I am the co-owner of Kim's Upholstery, which is an online classes website where we create video tutorials teaching DIYers just like you the art of upholstery. Now, oftentimes when I'm upholstering a piece of furniture, I'm not necessarily crazy about the finish on that piece. So today I have decided to go ahead and do this little dining room side chair, and I am going to be painting the surface of this frame. I've already gone ahead and taken the crud cutter, which you can get in your local hardware stores, and I've cleaned off the surface of the painted areas. And then I went ahead and washed that down to make sure that it didn't have any residue left. And then I lightly sanded the surface of the whole chair with a 150 grit sandpaper. And now I'm ready to go ahead and use my Miss Mustard Seed milk paint to give it the finish that I'm looking for. I've chosen the boxwood for my color, paint color for the chair. I'm going to be using the milk grip to make it adhere better to the surface because I'm not looking for a chippy finish. I'm looking for a more consistent color. I might sand it up a little bit in places later, but we'll decide that once we get the chair done. And then I'm also going to be using their new product called Milk Mix Ease. And that helps you to get the paint to not have that foamy consistency that sometimes it gets when you mix it up and you have to wait for it to settle down. So I'm going to go ahead and get these colors all mixed together, or these products all mixed together, and then we'll be ready to go ahead and paint the chair. The oil finish that I put on our chair has been on there for about 24 hours, so it's just about cured and ready for me to put the wax finish on. But before I do that, I thought we would get started on our slip seat portion of the chair because you don't want to be falling through the bottom. You need something to sit on, unless of course you're putting it in your garden with a flower pot, which is another possibility. So I'm using a 3/8 inch plywood. So I've cut the plywood to fit the frame of my seat, so to go around the edges of the chair, and then I've got the little cutouts in the back to go around these back post areas, which is what you'll see right here. To pad my seat, I'm using a high density firm foam. So this is a 1 inch, 2.6 density foam, which will give us a nice feel when we sit on the seat. And on top of that, I've added a 1 ounce bonded Dacron. I like the Dacron because it helps the wearability between the fabric and the foam. If you just have fabric on foam, it tends to fight against each other when it's got any movement from sitting on it, so it'll wear out your fabric much quicker. The Dacron will keep things lasting longer and feeling a little more plush. Now, are you ready to see the fabric that I've chosen? Again, I mentioned that I am always inspired by nature. I love being outdoors, hence the greens that I like here. So I have picked a really adorable, fun, and funky bird fabric. So it's got all the colors I love in it, which are the pinks and the greens, which obviously you can see I'm all about pink. And I've centered the motif to land just where I want it on our slip seat, excuse me. This piece of fabric for this chair only took a 24 by 24 inch square. So oftentimes you can get like 3/4 of a yard of fabric and get 2 slip seats out of them. It all depends on the size of your chair frame that you're working with. So next we're going to get started by stapling this to the frame. So I'm going to go ahead, move the chair out of the way and get my tools, and we'll be ready to go. All right, let's get started attaching the fabric to our slip seat. But let me tell you a little bit about the tools that I'm using. Now in upholstery, the tools haven't changed in a very long time, so there's a lot of basics that you can get, but you can also use stuff that you might have around your house. You could use a screwdriver for pulling staples. You can get something like this at the hardware store, which has like a little fork end to lift staples with. I like to use side cutters, or they're also called dikes, to pull the staples out of the frame once they've been lifted if you need to pull staples, because even though you're putting fabric on, you oftentimes need to make adjustments. And this is my favorite tool to use to pull staples. This is called an Osborne 120.5 staple puller. These are around $40, $30, $40 I think, but they are definitely worth having if you're going to do a lot of upholstery. But if you're only going to do a couple simple projects in your home, go ahead and use what you've got that will get the job done. Now, a pneumatic staple gun, though, is a necessity when it comes to doing upholstery. You can use some of the little hand staplers that they have out there, but it'll take much longer, and you'll find that you end up having to hammer most of the staples in because they just don't have the strength to go all the way in the wood. So we're going to be using a long nose staple gun, and I'm using 3/8 inch staples. And for fabric, you want a pair of scissors that are dedicated only to fabric. Don't let your kids go cutting paper with them because they won't work anymore. So let's go ahead and start doing this. I've got my fabric face down on my bench here. I've got my plywood with my foam that I need for my padding, and I've got it placed over the motif how I want it so that the birds land in the place they should be. But let me just double check to make sure. So if I pick it up, obviously this is upside down to you right now. So that is the right side up, and I've made it so that I have, what do I got, 5 birds landing right here in the center of my chair seat, which is what I wanted. And I just found a placement that was pleasing to my eye. There is no right or wrong way. It's really what works for you and what draws your attention. When you look at a piece, if you love it, you know you've got it the way you want. If you're not quite sure, shift it around a little bit and see how it looks in a different place. So let's go ahead and start doing this. And I am going to start in the front of my chair because I know that I don't want those birds to shift too much. I've left plenty of fabric on either side so that I've got plenty around the edges. I give myself typically 3 inches on each side, front and back, to have to pull to hold on to. Now people will say you're wasting fabric, but you really need that fabric to have a grip on in order to get a good result in your upholstery project. If you're cutting things too short, it'll be much more difficult, and sometimes your end results don't turn out quite the way you expected. I'm just going to get a few staples across the front, not going all the way to the corners because we'll deal with the corners later. And now I'm going to go to the back of my slip seat and pull the fabric tight. And it takes some strength here when you're doing this. And you want to pull consistently. And I may have to pop some of these out and adjust, which, like I said, is part of the process. So now let's take a peek and see how it's looking. So my placement still looks good. I like where the birds are landing, and that's starting to look nice. So I'll go ahead and get a few staples in the side, and then we'll go and adjust any pieces that or any staples that we put in initially if we need to along the front and back, because you want your depth to all be the same or your pull to all be the same so that you don't end up with ripples happening in your fabric. If you've got that, it's typically because you've either pulled too tight or not enough in some areas. And that's looking pretty good. I can see that I've got a couple places that I might have pulled a little too tight, so I'll go ahead and adjust those, and then we'll get the corners fixed. Okay, this side feels really good. This edge, I actually think is going to be fine. Check the back. Yeah, that's where I've got my first staple that I did in the center of the back. I can tell it's too tight just by the way the fabric looks to my eye. And you can also feel how the padding is sunk down a little bit further there. And it's just because I was a little bit aggressive pulling my fabric, and I got to pop that staple out and put in a different one. When you're using these staple pullers, you also don't want to keep your hands in front of it, because the worst thing is when you slip and you gouge your finger, and those things hurt for quite a while. And always have band-aids around when you're doing upholstery and slip covers, because you usually get some blood out of a staple, dinged by a staple. Oops. And my stapler jammed. Let's go ahead and pop that jammed staple out, and then we'll continue. There we go. Check it again just to be sure. And that looks pretty good. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and pull my corners. Now with your corners, It just depends on how thick your padding is and how you'll do your corners. These back cutout corners, I always pull from the center first, make a few snips, and then fold the fabric neatly around the edges of the cutout for the wood frame. Get this hose moved over. This one actually is not needing any cuts because I've got such a shallow padding on this. If I was using a 2-inch foam, that would be much more complicated to get that corner to look nice. Kind of like wrapping Christmas gifts, getting those corners to look neat. I think I'd much rather work with fabric than paper trying to wrap a gift. But it's all what you get used to doing as well. All right, so those two back corners are looking really fine. So now I'm going to do the front. And I always want my opening of my fold to head towards the side of the chair and not towards the face of the chair. It just looks much more professional and neater. Again, I'm watching my tension as I go. And slip seats are a good project to start with, to learn how to upholster and how to manipulate fabric. All right, need to do one more little fold here. And then a fold here. And I'm going to cut out some of this excess underneath here because the last thing you want is a lot of bulk. If you get a lot of bulk in the corners of your seat, when you go to put it on the frame of the chair, you'll actually see that it's lifted up on the corners and you might have a gap showing underneath the front of the seat, and you really don't want that look. It'll definitely look homemade. So I'm just going to trim back some of the fabric that we've already stapled down. Now in my tutorials, I talk all about the different tools that you use, the cuts you make, and what you use for padding in these different projects. And it varies from project to project. There isn't one method that works for everything. There's a lot of different methods that you would want to know to do more upholstery so that you have the knowledge and the skill set to be able to tackle just about any project that comes your way. There, now that front corner looks really well too. Let's do the last one. Okay, I have one staple that I didn't get in all the way. Probably had my gun at an angle. Let's pop that out and put in a new one. I'm going to use this other puller so that you can see that that works as well. And this is the one that kind of looks like a pitchfork at the end, sort of. Has a screwdriver handle. Now go ahead and trim the excess out of this corner. If you're nervous about trimming back, just start trimming a little bit first and then trim more as you need it. Don't go too fast in your trimming and end up having to cut away too much fabric. All right, now I want both of my corners to look the same. And we have accomplished that. Oops, I lost my grip here. And there we have the fabric portion of our slip seat for our chair completed. Now what I'm going to do is trim away the excess, and we're going to put a dust cover on the bottom, so that way our bottom looks all nice and neat if somebody looks up from the bottom of the chair. And actually, there's one more thing that I think I want to do before I put my dust cover on. Thinking about finishing, I thought, how can I make this chair just a little more fun and show some of my personality? And I chose some cool brush fringe to add around the bottom of our seat. Now, there's no reason when you're doing upholstery for yourself that you can't make it reflect you and have some fun with it. There's no rules. Do something fun and funky. So let's go ahead and attach this to the frame, and then I'll go ahead and put on this black dust cover to finish up the bottom. And there you have our finished slip seat for our project. I love how the tassel trim looks around the perimeter of our seat, and our corners turned out really fantastic. Now you too can do this simple project, and this took me less than a half hour to do the slip seat. The painting takes a little bit longer, and you also have to wait in between for the painting to dry, but the slip seat part is a really quick project to spruce up your dining room chairs. Let me go ahead and I will put the wax finish on the chair, and I'll come back and show you how it looks when it's all done with our seat screwed in place.